Okay, this week's Q&A is going to tie into that whole issue of like the war on drugs in America. But rather than recapping or having you kind of cite things from my lecture and talk about kind of the history of substance use and abuse in America or anything like that, I want you to do a little bit of thinking. Now, I think for this one, I'm going to talk about some potential new solutions, thinking outside the box to fix some of these old problems. Now, something that has been a problem in America, let me go through the problems first. Um, we saw it back in Prohibition. We see it today with the cartels and gang violence. That making a substance illegal creates a black market where you have to, if you wanted to use it, you have to go buy it illegally. That creates a high level of risk. The more you stiffen penalties and prison sentences for, trafficking drugs or things like that, the higher the price would go up, the bigger the risk. But you can also potentially make it more profitable for those criminal organizations. So that is a old problem from 100 years ago back in Prohibition and the Al Capone days. It's a modern problem with gangs in inner cities and the cartels that traffic in a lot of these substances. Another problem, and this one hits close to home because probably most of us living in this community, I know I can think of people that I personally know that have struggled with either alcohol, which of course that one is legal and regulated, but also with heroin, cocaine, those harder drugs. There has been a disturbing spike in increase in use of pills and heroin specifically, but also overdoses. Like I said, a lot of times it's not the heroin that necessarily makes people overdose, it's the fentanyl that it's cut with, and that happens because it's all being sold on the black market, and you have so many shady people handling it and trying to make their batch more potent. So the traditional solution that America has tried and kind of done over and over again is make the penalties stiffer, make the consequences, really, really, really stiff and firm. Lock up these drug dealers. You often lock up the users too. And I think those should be we should separate and put them into different categories because your average heroin addict, probably doesn't have a whole lot of extra money. They're not making a big profit. And there's somebody that generally is depressed. They have something going on in their life that's making it not good. A lot of stressors there. And they're trying to alleviate that stress and their problems through drug use. Now, of course, the drugs aren't going to fix anything. You have to make your life better and deal with and confront problems to do that. But a lot of people can't see that, or they can't find a path to making their life better. So just locking people up for that, well, on the one hand, it might detox them. Maybe that could be a good thing, but sometimes you're just punishing somebody who's already been punishing themselves and is already down and out and going to prison for 10 years or something. It might just compound their problems too. So we're not the only country in the world that is dealing with those kind of problems. Actually, it's widespread in first world countries. You see this in the modern age where we have, in a lot of ways, our lives have been made easier and easier. People don't have to struggle as much just to survive and get their next meal. That in a way is a good thing. In another way, having technology and being bombarded by media and all this stuff and not living like out in nature like humans evolved to has also led to huge upticks in anxiety and depression, and also a corresponding uptick in drug usage and overdoses and that kind of stuff. So we've tried stiffening penalties before, mixed results with that. I would say it's never fixed everything. Sometimes you can see a downtick in this stuff. Sometimes it's an uptick. But just as the case was with Prohibition, it wasn't a fix-all just to have stiffer drug penalties. Now, what I found that was interesting was this is happening in Europe and other places around the world too. In a couple countries that have a really interesting kind of different, unconventional approach. I just want to spin this idea to you, and then in this week's Q&A, you're going to tell me whether you think this is a good reason or not, and kind of have your answer display some critical thinking on it. All right. So I want to see your thought process. Now, let me be clear and upfront. I'm not saying we should take the Swiss or Portuguese approach. But I'm saying I'm interested in it, and maybe that would be a better alternative to what we've been trying. But really, I just want you to think about it, and I'm just going to explain what these two countries did and kind of share with you the results they've had. So the uptick in heroin usage, specifically and overdoses, started happening around the year 2000. It had been higher back in the Vietnam era. Then through like the 90s, it had dipped down. Then it resurfaces and comes back up in the 2000s in America and over in Europe. Um, Now, an issue in a lot of American cities, there will be syringes out in parks, and homeless people or bums laying out there that, could potentially find somebody with a needle hanging out of their arm that's OD'd. Not a good situation. I guess that was happening in Switzerland and in Portugal too. And they became very concerned about it. Now, you go back to like the 80s and 90s, they had heroin illegal just like it would be in the United States and had pretty stiff penalties. And if you know anything about like Switzerland, which most of you probably don't, that's a very conservative country. They're German speaking, they're very organized, orderly. Well, they had a prime minister come in the early 2000s, and she basically said that, hey, what we have now is anarchy and chaos. And that's all created because we have this black market for drugs. People have to buy it illegally. It's getting cut with other substances, which is leading to ODs. So she said, we're going to try something new. We are going to decriminalize it. And we're basically, both of these two countries have set up government clinics where anybody that wants to, anybody that's a citizen or a resident, can go register there and basically get a shot of heroin every day, one per day. Now, there was big pushback. A lot of people in those countries said, that sounds like that's terrible. That's not going to work. Drug use is going to go off the charts, and it's going to blow up this problem, and it's going to be anarchy in the streets. The Swiss prime minister, I heard her speak on it. She said, no, what we have now is a lot of chaos and, disarray. That by doing it this way, anybody that is an addict, it's going to get rid of the black market, because nobody would ever need to go buy heroin from a drug dealer anymore if the government is giving it to you for free. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money, because when you're buying it legally, like from a government facility that's processing it, basically that hit of heroin costs like pennies. It's dirt cheap. What they actually spend more money on is the nurses that will administer it. Now, the nurses don't exactly like inject it into you, but they're present the whole time. And any addict, any user that goes and registers there, they can show up each morning at whatever time it is that the clinic opens. They can get any dose of heroin they want except for a lethal one. So based on their body weight and size and all that, they can't take so much that would OD them, but they can have a max dose, or they can cut it in half or a third, and then they can show up again the next day and get a dose again. The nurse does not inject it, but the patient actually does. The nurse observes the whole time, and they have to sit there for a while afterwards, just in case there is an OD. You'd have medical professionals there that could use like the Narcan and bring them back. Also, as a condition of coming in and getting that like your daily hit of heroin, you also have to register for counseling services and basically like some therapy, where they try to get at like most people that are using heroin. It's not, some of them might just be an addict that are predisposed to liking it. But I think a majority of them, we found it's something bad in their life. So through the counseling and the services that they have to, sign up for now, they start working with them on getting a job, getting a place to live. Remember, because you can go in and just get it every day, there's no black market. So as soon as they did this, basically in Portugal and Switzerland, you don't find needles in the park or shady drug dealers in the alley anymore, because the black market just evaporated overnight. Now, you might say, like, a next follow-up thing, when I've talked to some people in my family about it, I actually talked to my parents and my mother-in-law, and they were pretty dead set against it. They had that initial knee-jerk reaction that, man, that's going to be chaos and everybody's going to start using heroin. But think about it. If heroin was decriminalized, like not ads on TV, not saying you can buy it at the local party store, but if you could go register and get hits, how many people realistically that right now that have their act together and have good things going in their life would go sign up for that and just go start getting on it because it's kind of quasi legal? When I think about that, honestly, I think Probably not very many, because, and we've seen with prohibition too, that, government policy making a substance legal or illegal doesn't seem to have a very big impact on what people actually do. That's a decision that you don't necessarily factor government policy in when you're deciding whether you're going to consume a substance or not. Now, for the long term, now that on its surface maybe has some merits, but I also would have some reservations about it. What I think speaks a little bit louder is this happened in about 2005 ish, give or take, and now we're in 2020s. What are the results that they've had? Well, basically, in those two countries, ODs have dropped almost nothing. I think maybe they've had a few ODs, but the last time I had checked, the OD rates have dropped and plummeted, where it's basically non existent because remember, it's the fentanyl that usually ODs people with heroin. Well, getting it at a government facility from a registered nurse, there's no fentanyl in it. It's just straight pure heroin that they're getting, and they're getting a non-lethal amount or dosage. Also, if you did OD, when that happens, which I guess it's pretty rare at these clinics, you have a nurse there on hand that's ready to give you, the Narcan and help you out and assist you so that you don't die from the OD. Now, drug rates, you would think, well, what if a lot of people start using it? What if the numbers spike through the roof and all kinds of, kids, as soon as they're 18, they go sign up for it? Because I do believe I think you have to be an adult or older to register for that program, although I'm not 100% sure on that. Actually, the rates did not really go up. And what they found through long term, like over a decade of tracking this data, that I believe, I would have to double check this for certain, but it's a very high amount, something like 97%. It was in the upper 90s for sure, of people that ever have gotten into that program are out of it within 3 years. So think about that. Now, instead of being like maybe in the American situation where you are an addict and you're using heroin and you just go get it from your drug dealer guy on the corner, and then you just sit in your basement and are depressed all day, and then the next day you repeat the process. The ones in Switzerland and in Portugal, they actually have to go in and get some counseling services. They try to get them placed into a job. They're able to start tapering back how much they use each day. You don't have to max out your dosage. And they found that as those people start to get their lives on track, the vast majority of them get out of the program. Now, there are some people, it was something around a 3%, it was sub 5% for sure, that have checked into this program, never leave. They just keep using it kind of indefinitely and keep coming back day after day. That's not a good situation. Yeah, maybe the government is kind of enabling that. But if you took that person and transplanted them over to America, would that person get off over here the way we're running things? Not likely. Maybe they'd get locked up in prison and be forced to, but chances are, for whatever reason, they have a weakness for it and just have no interest in getting off of it. But the one upside I would say there is, at least they're not overdosing. At least they're doing it in a controlled way. They're not out in the public streets. They're not next to a playground when they're using and injecting. And they're doing it in a semi-safe way where a nurse is watching them administer it. Now, tell me what you think. I've thrown this solution out, or not really. It's not my solution, but just this data and this different approach that these two countries have taken. To me, if you would have told me that they were trying this 15 years ago, and I wouldn't have had seen that long-term data, I probably would have had big reservations about it. I'm not sure that I'd have been on board with it. And most Americans have that reaction too. They're like, man, no way can you decriminalize these substances. But I'm also of the generation, I was born in 1981, and I remember I grew up through Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign, where it was really programmed into our heads that all of them are bad and stay away. Now seeing that data and the result countries have had, it makes me second guess that and think that maybe just stiffer penalties and cracking down and fighting it with law enforcement, maybe that's not the best approach. But what I'm interested in here is you doing a little digging, a little research, and considering this problem. Tell me, do you think, what is the answer? We have these two problems. There's an uptick and organized crime, gangs, cartels. They get most of their funding and revenue from selling black market drugs. We also have the problem that, and this has happened the COVID time. We don't have the data on it yet, but I'm guessing this last year has been a catalyst and probably going to make OD rates spike up tremendously higher than they were pre-COVID. I don't know. We'll see on that in the near future. But definitely spikes in usage, overdoses, that's a big problem here in America too. So you tell me, what I want you to think about is, what's the solution? Should we just crack down harder? Should we maybe, give more funding to the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration? Do we go to Mexico and fight the cartels and stiffen up penalties even more? That's one idea. I've heard politicians propose that. Or do you think we should pursue some alternative solution, something like what was done in Switzerland or in Portugal? Think about that a little bit. It's a pretty deep question, and I'll say right out of the gates, I have my own opinions on it, and I might release a video telling you kind of what I think about it, my current take is, but it's something that my opinion on this has evolved a lot over my lifetime. And I won't say that I have the perfect solutions to it at all, but I think it's a very interesting kind of moral, ethical, and policy-based question, and I'm curious what you guys think about it. So I kind of provided two different alternatives, but if you can think of another better approach that I didn't cover, by all means, throw it out there. So basically, open-ended on this one, and I will also include the question, kind of redefine it out in my notes section. What would be the solutions to those problems? What would you propose? How is the best way to kind of eliminate or get rid of the black market, get rid of organized crime, gangs, cartels, or at least them, and also get usage numbers and ODs down? What would be the best solution to that? Okay. If you need any follow-up or clarification, by all means, shoot me an email, or better yet, hop on down and see me.